afternoon and evening, wherever anybody might be. I apologize for being tardy, and offer my respects to all the devotees. Om Jnana Timidandhasya Jnanam Jana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Mukhaṁ karoti vachalam pangum langhayate girim jatkripa tamaham bande Shri Gurum Dinataranam. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamaham Dadati Svapadantikam. Mancha kalpa tarubhyascha kripa sindhobhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo. So this is the third in our series of looks at my hopefully journey toward writing an article that I've been fussing over and sitting on for too long, about the power and reach of this force we call Bhakti. And so today, part 3, I call it A Doubt Emerges. And that'll come a little later because I want to do a quick review. I'm not sure everybody here has been here for all the meetings, but I also kind of want to create a context for what we discuss a little bit later. So this all began some years ago when I read Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary on one of the verses that I've always really liked. Excuse me, I've always felt this is a really important verse, and Srila Prabhupada's purport on this verse is quite astonishing and generous. And it largely follows Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's, but with somewhat softer language, as we've seen. So the verse is Canto 1, Chapter 5, Text 19. This is Srila Vyasadeva, and this is Narada Muni advising Srila Vyasadeva ultimately to compile Srimad Bhagavatam, because he's found him completely depressed and not at all satisfied with all the service that he's done, although it consists of having brought together all kinds of scriptures for the benefit of all kinds of human beings. Still, he's not feeling satisfied. So Narada Muni is here to instruct him in the importance of teaching exclusive devotion to Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he's telling him what he's missing is a text that'll do that. So he says, Navaijano jatu katanchana brajen mukunda sevyan vyadam samsritin smaran mukundang krupaguhanam vihatu michen narasagrahojan. My dear Vyas, even this is Srila Prabhupada's translation. Even though a devotee of Lord Krishna sometimes falls down somehow or other, he certainly does not undergo material existence like others, the fruit of workers, etc. Because a person who has once relished the taste of the lotus feet of the Lord can do nothing but remember that ecstasy again and again. And then Banner Swami's translation is a little different. The person who serves Mukunda will never under any condition return to the material world, unlike practitioners of other processes. Remembering the embrace of the Lord's lotus feet, eager for that taste he has experienced, he will not desire to give up those feet again. And then Vishwanath Chakravarti's commentary, and this is the last paragraph of Vishwanath Chakravarti's commentary. Says, the verse also uses the phrase does not desire to give up instead of does not give up. This implies that he desires that he be devoid of pride in his practice. The accomplishment is in the hands of the Lord. And then now we're getting to the nut of the matter. The cause of not desiring to give up is then mentioned. Rasagraha means one who is eager for tasting, or one who has a taste, which is something like a ghost, which cannot be given up, haunted by rasa. And then my assumption is that he poses this next sentence as a doubt. The meaning is then that worship after the stages of nishta, ruchi, and asakti becomes actual rasa at the stage of rata. However, even from the first day of worshiping the Lord, there is certainly a portion of tasting rasa in a very covered form. And he cites a verse from the Bhagavatam. Devotion, Bhakti Pareshano Pavo Viraktir Yatra Chaisa Trika Eka Kalaha Prapadyamanasya Yatashnasyus Tushti Pushti Kshudapaya Nibhasa. Devotion, direct experience of the Supreme Lord, and detachment from other things. These three occur simultaneously for one who has taken shelter of Krishna in the same way that pleasure, fullness of the stomach, and relief from hunger are experienced simultaneously with each bite for a person engaged in eating. So here he's comparing the practice of bhakti with taking a meal. And I've always thought of this verse as maybe a look at, sometimes we wonder how we can tell if we're making spiritual progress. So this gives us a metric to use. Bhakti Pareshano Bhavo Vidaktira Nyatracha. So devotion, direct experience of the Supreme Lord, and detachment from other things, they occur simultaneously, and I would add progressively, for one who has taken shelter of Krishna. In the same way that Tushti, Pushti, and Kshudapaya come from eating. They also happen simultaneously, and they also happen progressively. So then, from there, I thought, okay, let me see what Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has to say in his commentary on this verse in the Bhagavatam. Because here, he just kind of presents it at the end of his tika and doesn't really discuss it. So in his commentary on the verse, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur writes, an example is given to show that even at the stage of sadhana, which gives great happiness, one achieves the result. When there is bhakti in the form of hearing and chanting about Krishna, the supreme deity, there should be a sweet experience. So the bhakti, it's the activity that we engage in, and then there should be some experience that comes from that. It's not that we do it to get the experience, but the experience should come. At that time, there should also be an experience of detachment from material happiness. That's the virakti, detachment from everything else. These three should arise at the same time for the person who worships Krishna. Similarly, for a person who eats, there is happiness, nourishment, and disappearance of hunger with each mouthful. As one takes a mouthful of rice, this happens. Just as a person who eats a little gets a little satisfaction, a little nourishment or fullness of the stomach, and a little relief from hunger, so a person who worships the Lord a little with hearing and chanting gets a little experience of the Lord and a little detachment from material life. And just as a person who eats a lot gets full satisfaction, full nourishment, and full relief from hunger, so a person who worships the Lord fully experiences the Lord fully and becomes completely detached from material life. But though it is impossible to keep eating, by more worship of the Lord, one becomes more capable of worshiping. That is the difference. So he keeps these two experiences quite parallel. The kind of analogizing the bhakti with the pleasure, pushti, the experience of the Lord with some kind of nourishment, and then when the hunger is satisfied, that's like becoming detached. When you're full, if someone brings you a gulab jamun or a bowl of chocolate ice cream, you may decide to pass, that you don't need it because you're feeling detached from eating. So, and then I came across some other verses from the 14th chapter of the 11th canto. This is the Bhagavad-Gita. This is Krishna speaking to Uddhava. And I've excerpted, included here some for the review today, some excerpts from the Tikas. So the first is 11:14:18. And we'll discuss these at greater length next week. Because here we're coming to the point where I encountered some doubt. So to further support what Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, he, in his commentary on this verse, Vadyamano pi madbhakto vishayera jitendriya, praya pragalbhaya bhaktya vishayera na vibhuyate. My dear Uddhava, if my devotee has not fully conquered his senses, he may be harassed by material desires. But because of his unflinching devotion to me, he will not be defeated by sense gratification. So in his commentary, Vishwanath says, putting aside the topic of the devotee who has developed bhava, which I think he discussed a little in the first part of the Tika, he says that the devotee at the very beginning of bhakti is also successful. By bhakti, which is generally strong, what to speak of bhakti, which is very strong, the devotee cannot be overcome by material enjoyment. So here, he seems to be addressing the sadhaka, because the sadhya, the siddha devotee, the accomplished or perfected devotee, will have completely conquered their senses, won't be harassed by material desires. But even at the stages of bhakti, he says, and he makes it even clearer here. He says the devotee at the beginning of bhakti is also successful. So this kind of echoes what we saw in the verse from the 5th chapter of the 1st canto, that a little bit of bhakti makes it possible to overcome the temptations for material enjoyment. The devotee is may not always do that at immature stages of practice, but that devotee will not ultimately be defeated by the desires for material enjoyment. And then, so he continues, but the devotee who commits sin is not criticized, and his position as a devotee is not denied. And he brings this in contrast with the jnani. Said if a jnani doesn't do everything right, his position as a jnani you can't really say that person is really a jnani. If they're allowing themselves to be overcome. And jnana really doesn't help us overcome prarabdha karma. The only thing that actually helps us overcome prarabdha, we've got the 4 stages of karma: bija, kuta, aprarabdha, and prarabdha. And some of the other processes can deal with the earlier stages of karma to some degree. But only bhakti can actually has the power to overcome even prarabdha karma, to displace even prarabdha karma. So then he cites the 30th verse of the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita. Apichet suduracharo bhajate mam anantapah. Sadhureva samantavya samyag vyavasito hisaha. Even if the most sinful person worships me, but with no other desire than to please me, I consider that person to be my devotee, as he has fixed himself completely in me. And in his commentary, Vishwanath writes, continuing his commentary on this Bhagavatam verse, Vishwanath explains, though the devotee is distressed by sense objects, he's not overcome. So this is clearly sadhana. And we'll see that argued next week by what may be a surprising source by the time we get to the end of today's presentation. It implies, though the devotee is distressed by sense objects, he's not overcome, because both verbs are in the present tense. It implies that even while being harassed by sense objects, he's not really harassed, since bhakti is present. A person who is attacked by the weapons of an enemy cannot be defeated because of the presence of his bravery. Or, on the day that a powerful medicine is taken to prevent fever, though the fever still causes suffering, it is not a real cause of suffering, since the fever is in a state of being destroyed and will be completely destroyed the next day. So this follows on, as we know, verse 31, the following verse says that because of this, just what Vishwanath says here, because of the devotee, even the faulty devotee's dedication to serving Krishna, that eventually, very quickly, the verse says, all these other things will be overcome. And then the next verse also tells us a little bit about the power of bhakti. Yatagni su samadharchi karote dhamsi basmasat tata madvishaya bhaktir udhavainam si kritsnashaha. My dear Uddhava, just as a blazing fire turns firewood into ashes, similarly, devotion to me burns to ashes sins committed by my devotees. So this is a really clarifying statement here, that it's the bhakti that destroys the sinful reactions that are due to the devotee. It's not anything that we can do. We've spent more lifetimes than anyone can imagine being overcome by Krishna's inferior energy, because we're so tiny. But it's the bhakti, this powerful force bhakti, that destroys these sins. So still, we're clearly addressing a sadhaka. But even a sadhaka will always ultimately attain success in bhakti because of the power of bhakti herself. And then this is at the end of this section. There's this section. I will discuss this whole section. There are several verses. What did we start with? So there are like 7 or 8 verses. And we'll see next week that most of these verses actually do address sadhakas, not siddhas. So this is text 26. Yata yatatma parimrijyate sa punyagata shravanadhi Shravanabdhi bhanai tata. Tata pashyati vastu shukshman chakshur yataivancha na samprayuktam. When a diseased eye is treated with a medicinal ointment, it gradually recovers its power to see. Similarly, as a conscious living entity cleanses himself of material contamination by hearing and chanting the pious narrations of my glories, he regains his ability to see me, the absolute truth in my subtle spiritual form. And then Vishwanath writes, starting with the first service, this is just what we see in his commentary on 1.5.19. He says from the first day of practice. So here, starting from the first service, in proportion to the purification of the Atma by pure bhakti, and in proportion to the hearing, chanting, and remembering. So that also echoes the verse from the second chapter of the 11th canto that we've just read. One attains various degrees of realization of my sweetness. So here, we're talking about sadhana bhakti. So as I'm going through reading these, finding these verses and reading these commentaries, I'm becoming progressively excited about this idea, how powerful bhakti is. Because of bhakti's power, even sadhakas at the early stages ultimately become really uncomfortable. In proportion to hearing and chanting my glories, one sees the real nature, vastu, of my form and pastimes with an experience of sweetness, shukshmam. Vastu shukshmam is a dvandva compound expressed in the singular number, or it can mean subtle truth with the modifier placed after the noun as poetic license. One eye is better than being blind. Better than that is having both eyes. And better than that is having the eyes anointed with special ointment so that one sees finer objects. As most of you know, the Sanskrit word for fine is shukshma. So that's an important word in this text. So, by this time I was thinking, wow, this is really cool. I think I've got this. This is a really big thing. Bhakti is so powerful that that it actually helps the bhakta overcome all kinds of obstacles. But then I thought, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur seems quite liberal in matters about bhakti. He seems a little zealous in his advocacy of bhakti. I wonder if this is a little over the top, and I wonder how Srila Jiva Goswami, who is more conservative in a number of ways, or who expresses more conservative ideas in a number of ways, how he approaches this. So then I thought about, what about the sixth of the six aspects of bhakti that are discussed early in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, right in the first chapter. So that sixth is Sri Krishna Karshan. And many of us may remember from discussing Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu a number of times that in the first chapter, discussing bhakti generally, Srila Rupa Goswami posits 6 characteristics that can be found in bhakti, 2 of which become prominent during sadhana bhakti, 2 of which become prominent during bhava bhakti or rati, and 2 of which become prominent in prema bhakti. So the 2 that become prominent in sadhana bhakti are kleshagni and shubhada, that the devotees experience relief from material distress because Bhakti Devi is destroying even the prarabdha karma of the bhakta. And shubhada, bestows auspiciousness, brings happiness into the devotee's life. And the two that appear, that become particularly prominent during Bhava Bhakti are, it's Sudurlabha, it's very rarely achieved. Bhava is indeed very rarely achieved. Even sadhana bhakti is very rare among human beings. Bhava bhakti is certainly more rare. And moksha lukutakrit, that it makes light, literally, I guess, of the accomplishment of moksha or liberation. Srila Prabhupada often uses the word derides, but it derides even the pleasure that is attained by attaining moksha or liberation. And then in prema, two other characteristics become prominent. So the others keep growing. The relief from suffering and happiness, auspiciousness. Oops, sorry. Oops. So so those are certainly, and by Bhava Bhakti, those become pretty complete. And then the rarity and derision of the accomplishment of moksha are still there. And two others, Sandrananda Visheshatva. It's a very concentrated form of the highest bliss. And Sri Krishna Karshana, which Srila Rupa Goswami discusses in texts 41 and 2 of the first chapter of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Sri Krishna Karshani, Bhakti attracts Krishna and his associates. So this is Prema Bhakti, because that's the context in which we're discussing this. And so Srila Rupa Goswami says, Bhakti is called Sri Krishna Karshani because it makes the Lord addicted to prema and brings him under control along with his associates. So this is an astonishing, this is just an astonishing characteristic of prema bhakti, that it actually controls Krishna. But we see this everywhere in Krishna's Leela, especially in the Braja Leela. The devotees, because of the strength of their bhakti, they're able to control Krishna. Cowherd boys are able to beat him at wrestling. Radharani is able to send him into a downward spiral of self-doubt with a cross look. Mother Yashoda brings tears to his eyes when she comes after him with a stick. And so the devotees' bhakti overwhelms Krishna. We'll see next week as well a verse that I've cited many times, and which I have promptly forgotten the Sanskrit for. Bhakti Revaya Nayati, Bhakti Revaya Nayati, Bhakti Revaya Darshayati, Bhakti Vasa Purushaha. And then the last pada says, Bhakti is the most powerful thing of all, and I can't remember that at the moment. So Bhakti has the power to draw us near to Krishna. Bhakti Reva Nayati, certainly only Bhakti. And certainly only Bhakti has the power to show us Krishna. Bhakti Reva Darshayati. And Bhakti Vasa Purusha means Bhakti brings the Purusha, Bhakti brings the Supreme Lord under control, subdues. She subdues Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, the text says that Bhakti is the most powerful thing of all. Now, get to the meat here, and this is where things take a bit of a turn. It's like in a sonnet, there's a certain point, depending on which kind of sonnet, where the sentiment being expressed in the poem takes a bit of a turn. That's called the volta. So this was kind of my volta moment. Jiva Goswami comments on this verse, because prema is attractive to him, akarshana, he is called prema bhajam. addicted to prema in his devotees. The word Shri in Sri Krishna Karshini indicates Priyavarga Samanvitam along with his dear associates. And then in the next verse, Srila Rupa Goswami, as he does consistently, draws from the Bhagavatam and other scriptures to support this. So here he cites a text that we didn't look at a few minutes ago. It's from this same chapter, the 14th chapter of the 11th canto. And in text 20, he says, this is a very powerful verse, Na sadhayati mam yogo, na sankyam dharma uddhava, na svadhyayas tapastyago, yata bhaktir mamorjata. The Bhagavatam says in the 11th canto, my dear Uddhava, again, this is Krishna instructing Uddhava, the unalloyed devotional service in the form of prema bhakti rendered to me by my devotees brings me under their control. Those engaged in mystic yoga, Sankhya philosophy, pious work, Vedic study, austerity, or renunciation cannot thus control me to this extent. So, again, this is very powerful. And we go back to, it harkens back to the 19th verse of the 5th chapter in the 1st canto, which especially when we couple it with the 17th verse and the 18th verse as well, but it draws a stark contrast between the practice of bhakti and every other kind of practice, whether it be aimed at karma, yoga, or jnana. So this is really something. It shows, Krishna here is admitting that bhakti has the power to bring me under control, and nothing else can. But because the word here uses nasadhyati, this is a sadhya bhakta. This is an accomplished or perfected bhakta, a siddha. So Jiva Goswami writes, though one may conclude that the bhakti mentioned here is sadhana by comparing it with other processes, such as Sankhya, it cannot be an example of sadhya that brings Krishna under control, because of the statement in verse 41 that Krishna is brought under control only by sadhya bhakti. Thus, the meaning is bhakti after producing sadhya bhakti controls me. So this is the bump in my little my little road here. This is not at all different from what I expected. I had read this before, which is probably why I decided to go back and check this particular section of the 1st chapter. And so then I thought, well, what does that do for the case that I would like to make, that that bhakti is so powerful that even at the very beginning of our practice, we have this some power to control Krishna. So then I thought, where else would Jiva Goswami discuss this? And I thought, perhaps must be Bhakti Sandarbha. The Bhakti Sandarbha describes, the Bhakti Sandarbha is of the 6 Sandarbhas, the first 4, the Tattva Sandarbha, Paramatma Sandarbha, Bhagavat Sandarbha, and Krishna Sandarbha. They're all focused on Sambandha Gyan, helping the Bhakta develop Sambandha Gyan and understand how that works. The 5th, the Bhakti Sandarbha, addresses Abhideya Gyan, which is how to realize this relationship, the process for realizing this relationship. So the Bhakti Sandarbha discusses bhakti as a practice, as a process, rather than bhakti as the ultimate attainment. That will be there in the Priti Sandarbha. Priti is synonymous with prema, and in many usages. And so in the Priti Sandarbha, we'll see how bhakti as prema manifests in the devotee's heart. But the Bhakti Sandarbha deals with bhakti as a practice. So I thought, okay, so maybe he discusses this somewhere in the Bhakti Sandarbha. So I'm searching through a couple of different translations of the Bhakti Sandarbha. And then I come to Anucheta 147, section 147, which could be called even sadhana bhakti captivates the Lord. So actually this section, this is actually probably sections 147 and 148 that make this case. And so here we are in Anucheta 147. He's making his case. He says, Dhruva's life is the proof that bhakti bestows results or exceeding anything a devotee could conceive within the mind, because the Lord offered Dhruva his own planet along with supreme devotion. Examples of how bhakti controls the Lord have already been given in verses such as this. So he cites these two verses from the 14th chapter, which we also haven't looked at yet. But we will look at this entire section together with Jiva Goswami's analysis of it next week. So it's the same verse, na sadhayati mam yogo, na sankyam dharma uttava, na svadhyayas tapastyago yata bhaktir mamorjita. My dear Uddhava, unalloyed devotional, now here the translation is unalloyed devotional service. So it's a little looser translation. I don't remember if that's from Bhanu Swami's or from Srila Prabhupada's presentation of the Bhagavad-Gita. Excuse me. The unalloyed devotional service rendered to me by my devotees brings me under their control. I cannot be thus controlled by those engaged in mystic yoga, Sankhya philosophy, pious work, Vedic study, austerity, or renunciation. Oh, it wouldn't have been actually Srila Prabhupada's unless it was borrowed from Chaitanya Charitamrita. And then Jiva Goswami says, after this verse, the Lord has also said, Bhaktyaham ekaya grahya shuddhayatma priyasatam, bhakti punati manishta swapakan apisambhavat. Only by practicing unalloyed devotional service with full faith in me can one obtain me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I'm naturally dear to my devotees who take me as the only goal of their loving service. By engaging in pure devotional service, even the dog eaters can purify themselves from the contamination of their low birth. So, from what we just saw in Jiva Goswami's commentary on text 20, you would think that we must be speaking exclusively about Prema Bhakti, Siddha Bhakti. But this is in a section addressing how even sadhana bhakti can actually overpower the Lord, actually attract and captivate and control the Lord. So Jiva Goswami comments here. He says, a point to be considered here is that this statement, which appears in the 14th chapter of the 11th canto, is a description of the glories of bhakti without specifying whether the bhakti being referred to is that of the practicing stage or the perfectional stage. Therefore, it is difficult to establish from this verse that it is the greatness of bhakti in the practicing stage that is referred to. Yet, even if the verse is describing the glories of bhakti in the perfectional stage, the practice stage is thereby glorified because it is only through practice that perfection comes about. So this is, when I read this, I just thought, well, wow, here we go. Perhaps there's some room for a different understanding, a different reading of these verses. And as we'll see next week, Jiva Goswami gives us just that. And I haven't yet been able to establish the dates for Jiva Goswami's editing and commenting on the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and his composing the Bhakti Sandarbha. But my guess is that the Bhakti Sandarbha comes later. And that's, I'm still trying to see if I can chase that down. If anyone knows anything about this, I would be happy to know. Anyone has access to some information that helps us understand the sequence of these compositions. Because if it came later, you could make a case that this is Jiva Goswami expressing a different understanding from what he had, perhaps more mature, or perhaps for a different audience than when he wrote his comment on this 20th verse in the first chapter of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. But then, I mean, even so, this is kind of a transition here. It looks like we're talking about sadhana bhakti, or about sadhya bhakti, siddha bhakti, perfected bhakti, even though it's not specifically stated. So here, instead of saying nasadhyati means only prema bhakti, only perfected bhakti. He says it's not clear. But he says, even if that's the case, even if it really is just describing the glories of prema bhakti, still it glorifies the practice stage, because it's only through practice that we come to perfection. The goal of our engaging in sadhana bhakti, the sadhya of sadhana bhakti, is bhava bhakti. And the sadhya of bhava bhakti is prema bhakti. So it's sadhana bhakti that makes, that makes sadhya bhakti possible. So he says that even if it's the case that we're discussing perfected bhakti in these two verses, still they also glorify sadhana bhakti, because it's only by sadhana bhakti that we attain sadhya or siddha or prema bhakti. So, but then he continues to make a rather elaborate argument, an extended argument that's quite different from the argument that he makes in his commentary on verse 20 in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, as we'll see next week. So I'm leaving us with the cliffhanger here. I also want to mention that as I was going forward in the notes that I put together for working on this article, I found that I had who was it? Shamananda, I think last week suggested Bhagavad-Gita 240 as another supporting verse. And I see that I have that and 930 in my notes from when I was working on this before. So I felt a little proud of myself for that, although a little embarrassed about having to admit that I had forgotten what was in my notes, about 18 pages of them. I'll stop here and see if there are any comments, reflections, questions, or other suggestions for support that I might not have considered yet. And because I'm not hosting, I depend on Shaman and Sakyarati to let people unmute themselves.
Pranams, Maharaj.
Back at you.
So I came to think of something here now that you read this.
Should I have my notebook?
Oh.
Where's my pencil? Okay, I'm ready.
Yes, now that you read this last discussion here of Jiva Goswami about whether the practice stage can also be included. I remember reading from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary on the first canto. Not sure which verse now, but I can try to look it up, where he calls sadhana as an anga of prema bhakti.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was that.
That's wonderful. I like that. Thank you.
Jai.
Anything else? Kanaram, nothing?
I don't necessarily have much to.
Uh-oh, I can't hear you. What did I do
Oh
wrong?
boy. See.
Are you in the English channel, Kanaram?
Sorry, I was not. I didn't have everything correct technically. No, I've been listening to this series of classes again and again this over the past week, and I really appreciate your pounding on this post. I heard other really nice devotees use this verse about eating and feeling satisfaction and comparing that to devotional service over the years. I think that's really nice. And I have a question though, and your class has sort of answered this kind of class is sort of answering this question. I just had something that came up. Tripurari Swami Guru Maharaj is in town now, and I was with some friends, and they were asking, they were wishing that there was something a little more practical about hearing about Krishna and hearing about the Leela, hearing about Krishna's pastimes. But I was thinking that there are a lot of things about hearing such a class which are practical in a deeper way because it changes one's heart. So like what you're saying now is like we are becoming changed by the act of hearing. Hearing in and of itself is devotional service, and this class is answering a lot of that. How is like hearing about bhakti practical?
Yeah, that's a question that arises sometimes, and different devotees. I mean, everybody has different approaches to presenting, what we understand of the philosophy. One of the devotees here is taking one of those Vrindavan Institute or higher education courses. She's got this series of courses, 3 hours a day, 6 days a week for it's going to be 4 months. But she just begun a Bhagavad-Gita overview course this week with a brahmachari, I guess from Radhanath Swami's Chaupati temple, I'm assuming. She's been really struck by by how he is able to kind of like boil things down. And she said, we were just speaking yesterday evening, and she said that she's been telling me, that I have been having my mind blown by this Bhagavad Gita overview class practically every day. She comes and says, boy, something blew my mind again today. And then it's late enough that she, it's usually the next day because it's an evening class here for us. And she's forgotten exactly what it was, but she's really impressed by his ability to kind of boil this all down and present it in terms that are easy to understand and practical, easy to apply practically. At least easier to figure out how you might apply these understandings practically in our lives as sadhakas. And then last night she says, Maharaj, my mind was blown again today by my Bhagavad Gita class. And we're in the 7th chapter, and what blew my mind was that it's not this teacher or his presentation that's blowing my mind. It's Krishna that's blowing my mind. Krishna, the way he presents himself in the Bhagavad Gita. And I just thought, well, that's a kind of a breakthrough moment right there. So yeah, how to do, what's practical about it. And we see that here, that hearing and chanting. I mean, if this is a goal in our life, and everybody here has this as a goal in our life, because we are all, let's be frank, haunted by rasa. We've all been around for years, some of us for years and years and years. And we've all had difficulties dealing with, the different things, dealing with our mind, dealing with, our false ego getting in the way of our trying to surrender more. And certainly dealing with the call of our different senses. We all do, as sadhakas. This is our life. Something comes up and we have to push our way through it. Just like when we were reading Madhurya Kadambini at Madhuban a few years ago, we were reading about the stage of anishtita bhajana kriya, or unsteady practice. And so you've got these obstacles that you've got to get through. First of all, you got these anarthas, and then you have these obstacles that are created by bhakti before we actually get to nishtita bhajana kriya. Utsahamai, thinking that you've gotten somewhere you actually hadn't yet. Running hot and cold in our practice, getting all excited about the side benefits, the perks that come with practicing bhakti, things like that. And about these things, this one devotee asked me, Maharaj, how do we avoid these obstacles? And I thought, no. And so I responded by saying, no, we don't avoid them. We can't avoid them. These are the obstacles that are going to present ourselves as we progress towards a steadier practice. But Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has taken the trouble to describe these things to us in some detail so that we can understand what's happening as we make progress in bhakti. The Madhurya Kadambini is kind of a roadmap for progressing through the 9 stages of bhakti that Srila Rupa Goswami describes in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So this is all very practical, because we see that a little hearing and chanting draws us to more hearing and chanting. And that detaches us more from the pursuit of pleasure by interacting with sense objects, by interacting with dead matter, inert matter. We think that we can get some real pleasure, lasting pleasure from interacting with dead matter. But the examples of some great pleasure, how long do they last? Sex is one, it lasts a few minutes, and there's some kind of lingering afterglow pleasure or something like that. But 10 minutes later, y'all may get into a fight again. So, how great is that? Another, in my experience, is surfing. And I've timed videos of guys like on a really, really good tube, what seems like a really long ride, like a pipeline or some other place like that. And they may go as long as 13 seconds. You go out there, you paddle out there, or you go out in a boat or what are those inflatables, or with a jet ski or something like that. You go out there to where these waves are, and you paddle, you jockey for position with the other surfers, and it's just always so crowded now that I don't even find myself attracted to going out surfing anymore, because I just can't. First of all, I'm an old man, I'm out of shape, and so everybody's going to hate me anyway. And the first thing I do wrong, it's going to be me in some character's fist. So, but you go to all that trouble, and you're running the risk in some way, in some places, some spots where the waves break really big, like Chopu in Tahiti, or Jaws here on Maui, or Mavericks in California, and you could die. People die on those waves. And why is that? So you can get 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes of pleasure. There are a couple of places like off the coast of, I think, West Africa. There's a place called Skeleton Bay, where they just have these seemingly interminable tubes. People can take off on a wave and just stay in the tube for 2, 3, 4 minutes. Of course, paddling back to where you want to start, that's a long paddle. But generally, you catch a wave, and if you're someone like me who just found that this almost transcendent pleasure, where there's nothing else going on in the world, still it only lasts a few seconds. Your sense of time is warped by the experience. But if you look at it objectively, it might be as long as 15 or 20 seconds, and that's it. So, the practical value is that we get further experience of the Lord, which spurs us to further practice, which also helps us become more detached from the things that cause suffering. Dukkha yonaya evate, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad-Gita. Guru Maharaj likes to point this out a lot, that yonaya evate, Prabhupada says this is the source of our suffering, our attachment to these things, but our pursuit of sense objects. Guru Maharaj likes to take that word yoni and use it very literally. This is the womb from which our suffering was born. So yeah, I appreciate that. And I appreciate your appreciation. And we'll see more next week. And the following week, I just realized yesterday that October this year has 5 Saturdays. So I thought, okay, I thought I was going to be done next week, and now I've got to rejigger things. So we'll see next week and the week after more of how these things go. Martin, was that your hand? Oh, Omkar.
Haribol Maharaj, thank you for the class.
Haribol, there he is.
I just had a little correlation in my mind that comes from the little discussion at the very end of your class about the glory of practicing prema bhakti, I guess. Discussion. I forget now who it was. I think it was Madhva. We're talking about practicing. Can you hear me?
The sound is a little pinky.
Okay. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Okay. My comment was about thinking of practicing prayer bhakti, and I thought about Shuddha Bhakti or chanting Shuddha Nam. It's basically what we do. We do chant Shuddha Nam, and we do practice Shuddha Bhakti, and it's so glorious that like somebody saying it's like you're basically there. And even though we're in pure name, we're not at the Shuddha Bhakta level perhaps, but it's so glorious that we might as well be. We're so close to be. So yeah, something little that came to my mind.
Yeah,
a little bit of hope.
Yeah, as Guru Maharaj also likes to point out frequently, our god brother Vishnu Jan Swami would when he was teaching, he would say that the distance that you've come to have met Sadguru is much farther than the distance that you have left to go. We're actually, although it may seem far from the goal, and the closer we get, it seems like the distance seems to keep growing, expanding. Maybe just much like at the end of a race, you come around, maybe you're running a half marathon, and you've done 12 miles, which includes an uphill long, like one half marathon I ran about 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago. There's this long hill going up into Balboa Park in San Diego. That's right at the end of the race. And then the last part is a flat. And as you're going up that hill, you realize I've run 11 and a half, 12 miles already. And I'm really almost there, but you're chugging up that hill. Well, if you're like me anyway, you're chugging up that hill. You just kind of like dig in, you're just pacing yourself. I'm gonna hit the crest, and then there's gonna be a flat to the finish line. And so it kind of, the distance seems to expand as we get closer, but still, it is a fact. We're pretty much done. You know, you can stick a fork in us to see just how done we are, but the game is pretty much over once by the grace of some bhakta, some madhyam adhikari bhakta, that bhakti enters our heart because of that bhakta's kindness. Madhurya Kadambini points out at the very beginning that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur makes a rather elaborate argument about how independent Krishna is in order to make the point that Bhakti Devi is every bit as independent as Krishna, and she can go wherever she likes. But the way she works is that she follows the lead of those sadhus who have accepted in her in their hearts, in whose hearts she has taken shelter, and wherever they show kindness, she follows that bhakta's lead and enters that person's heart. And so, even though they may not know what's going on yet, it's just a matter of time. There's no real possibility of failure because of the power of Bhakti Devi, who can even subdue Krishna. If Bhakti Devi can overcome Krishna, she can certainly overcome my sinful desires. So yeah, by practice, as Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says at the end of his commentary on 11.2.42, he says, by practicing bhakti, by eating, you become full, and eventually you're just not interested in eating anymore. But practicing bhakti enables you to practice even more. So, yeah, the hearing and chanting process is actually very, and we can watch that. We can gauge that. Check where we were 5-10 years ago. What our understanding of bhakti was, what our commitment to our practice was 5 or 10 years ago, compared to what it is today. And quite often we'll see that we've actually made a great deal of progress by the mercy of the devotees. Is there anything else before we adjourn? Mahara, no questions? I guess not. Okay, then, with that, since we're at the bottom of the hour again, I guess we can adjourn until next week when we pick up the trail where we left off. Thank you all so much for your company and your wonderful discussion. Oh, there's Mahara. You still in North Carolina, Mahara? How soon? Oh, we can't hear her because she's.
We're moving on October 26th.
Cool. Very cool. Very cool. Build a house and then move.
Yeah. I like your classes, Mars. They're so wonderful.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you. You're very kind. Thank you. Oh, who's that talking? Okay, thank you all so much. We'll see you again next Saturday. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Sripad Bhakti Abhay Ashram.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
Hare Krishna.
Bye.